wow
Yeah.
on that one. I mean, Nexus, I mean. Yeah, look out, more reading for us. Yeah, right.
Hello everybody, good evening, and welcome to Magers and Quinn. My name is Sarah, and I'm one of the booksellers here. I'm so pleased that you're joining us tonight for Jack Seitz' book, Wrath of Peace, and How the Wellicans Save the World.
Come on, Wellikins, we need you.
Yes.
A few housekeeping things before we get on the show tonight. There will be a time for the end of the conversation for audience questions, so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. After Q&A, please allow the author to move to the signing counter at the front. It looks like a glass display case. You can grab a book there, say hi, ask any other wandering questions, and get the scoop. But just to mention, if you do buy a book here this evening, you're not only supporting our author this evening, but you are supporting an independently owned bookstore, and we cannot thank you enough. So please allow me to introduce Jack. Jack Seitz is a professor. Jack Seitz is a professor emeritus of German at the University of Minnesota and has previously held professorships at New York University, the University of Munich, and the University of Wisconsin, and the University of Florida. In addition to his scholarly work, he is an active storyteller in public schools and has worked with children's theaters in France, Germany, Canada, and the United States. In 1997, he founded a storytelling and creative drama program, Neighborhood Bridges, in collaboration with the Children's Theater Company in Minneapolis that is still thriving in the elementary schools of the Twin Cities today. Regarded as a major American translator, he has published the complete fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, Beauties, Beasts, and Enchantment, classic French fairy tales, the fairy tales of Hermann Hesse, and he has also edited Spells of Enchantment, the wondrous fairy tales of Western culture, The Outspoken Princess and the Gentle Knight, and the Oxford Companion to Fairy Tales, Buried Treasures, The Poetic Powers, and Fairy Tales. Please allow me to introduce Jack.
Thank you all for coming despite this nasty weather outside. But you made it, and you're safe here, so, and there's plenty to drink to help you survive, and plenty. Tonight I'd like to introduce, there are 3 books that I've recently published, and I'd like to begin by a telling of the first 2 chapters by my friends Maria Asp and Lee Jorgensen, and who are wonderful actors, and not only wonderful actors, but also dynamite performers in all sorts of ways. We're going to begin with that, and when they're done, I'll comment on why I wrote this novella. It's actually a novella for young adults, although I think hopefully adults will also like it. Depends on the attitude toward fantasy books. And part of this, I'll mention after this, is there'll be 2 more novellas linked to this. This is part of a trilogy. And but for tonight, we're just going to deal with this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Maria and Lee, and they're going to take it away.
Okay, ready? Here we go. Last call for our get up and get your cheese whenever you want. Chapter 1, Magic in the Air.
I can't really tell you how all this stuff with the Wellikins happened, but I'll try. This is a true story, so gather around, I don't lie.
Nobody knew how those twin witches appeared in the forest, but there they were. A girl about 16 years old with glistening golden hair and sparkling blue eyes. She had flown like a butterfly into the forest with her twin brother on her back.
Not to be outdone in skill and looks, he had fiery red hair and piercing verdant eyes that could easily stun and paralyze you if you looked into them too long. That's how captivating they were. They did not need a magic wand to charm you. Once they landed, the boy, whose name was Zach, jumped off his sister's broad back and declared, "Home!"
Home, Anya, his sister repeated, and they smiled at each other.
"Time for a jig and a song," Zach exclaimed with joy.
Time for a merry jig and melodies, his sister repeated. As soon as she said this, they looked around themselves and were saddened. All the houses, bungalows, and hotels had rotted. The forest had been decimated. The magnificent trees, the oak and maples, the birch and the pines, not to mention the noble redwoods, which had been stripped and had become scrawny. Not a leaf could be seen, nor a flower in bloom. The grass was pale yellow, and all the streams and brooks were desperate for water.
"A wasteland," Zach said.
A wasteland, commented Anya with a heavy heart.
They looked at each other with bright smiles.
Anya was the first to react. She turned herself into a glorious bumblebee and began zooming through the dead forest. The time has come to sing for joy. Dark days are gone. We'll dance again. Her sizzling voice cut through the trees, causing all the animals to wake.
Suddenly, Zach began to dance a jig on the ground, following his sister, who was briskly buzzing through the dead, dark forest. And each time she took a rest on a pale tree, it sprouted leaves again, and Zach whisked out a flute from his backpack and played an enchanting tune. The flowers popped from the ground throughout the forest. You can't imagine how Anya and Zach ignited the fire in the hearts of all the trees, flowers, bushes, and grass. But most of all, you can't imagine how their singing and dancing ignited the hearts of all the animals who had hidden in the caves and underground tunnels of the forest for years.
The wolves howled again in joy. The bears growled again in joy. The squirrels sprang from tree to tree, while the wise owls hooted and warned the hundreds of tiny animals to be aware. There was unknown magic in the air. Perhaps Nexus's guards had found a new, deceptive way to trap and destroy them.
"You're lucky to be alive once more," the wise owl scolded the chipmunks and beavers, not to mention the leaping frogs and twirling snakes. "There's magic in the air, but we don't trust all this music and dancing. Beware!"
Just then, Anya landed above the branch on which the owl was preaching. However, she was not welcome.
"Beware! Beware! Hoot! 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 They'll try to kill us again," the owl warned. "They are vile agents of Nexus!"
From bee to human, Anya changed herself on Owl's branch. In protest, she cried, "There's nothing to fear, my friends. The forest is yours, and you're safe. We're here to celebrate. We'll live in peace and protect you as best we can. Those nasty humans will learn a lesson or two. Not all are nasty, but a few. Trust us, please. Just look at what the magic in the air has done for you."
Indeed, marvelous music filled the air, and all at once the animals and even the insects began to gather and embrace one another. To everyone's surprise, two monstrous elephants and prancing horses gave their word not to step on the tiny ones as they danced in the forest. Word had reached them deep in the caves, and out they came, those mighty beasts whose kindness all the animals could sense.
Now the entire forest was stirring, and the monkeys acted like messengers, swinging from tree to tree. "We are free," they sang. "We are free, just look at us."
The gorillas and chimpanzees followed them, but they were not as fleet as the swift, rapacious monkeys. Despite the fact that the forest was humongous, it did not stop the monkeys, who reported that the last marvelous forest on Earth had been reawakened, and each and every animal could live again, although they were still afraid that the humans might use their weapons to find them and kill them for their pleasure.
Just as several deer, moose, and buffalo were about to come out of their hideout, there was a huge, thunderous, and dynamic clap that resounded in the forest, which turned the forest into a massive island. We are talking about thick, glistening marble stones that suddenly formed a wall on all sides of the forest, which was now 1,000 miles long and wide.
The wall embraced the trees, and the trees embraced the wall, so that nobody could enter the island, and nobody could detect what was transpiring on the island. Strangely, none of the animals, birds, and insects, protected by the marble wall, knew who it was who had regenerated them with hope.
They thought they saw a tall, gaunt, aged woman, 8 feet tall, wearing a black cape that was spread into wings. Did she bring about this sudden change? Or was she an evil devil? It was difficult to see her face. Perhaps it was a hawk, the animals thought. Perhaps she was a spy. Perhaps Nexus had sent her, and now she was gone.
In the meantime, Anya and Zach zoomed into the air as bees softly touched plants, fields, insects, birds, beasts, and fish. And as they did, they danced their jig and sang the song of peace and freedom.
Chapter 2, The Mission and the Mess of the World.
Yet everything was not so peaceful or free nearby on the gigantic island, simply called the Dark Island of Nexus, and named after the present king. He was a massive, ornery, sly, and sadistic man. He grumbled and ordered workers to build new weapons and machines. He lived in a mansion guarded by 500 beastly robots. This was a man born, believe it or not, to be a genius. By the time he was 10 years old, he was developing all sorts of plans to change the world and to make it a better place to live. But somewhere along the way, he became so bitter, narcissistic, cruel, and sinister that he used all his inventions to start wars in hope that he could rule the world.
His home was the dark island across the way from the Island of Light, where Anya and Zach had landed to escape Nexus. For he had ordered sirens to sound from elegant skyscrapers and wanted to kill the twins who had escaped his claws while they were searching for their parents on his island.
Missiles were fired and jets took off. Stealthy, tiny drones protected the people on this eternal dark island, only made bright through artificial electricity, for the sun refused to shine there anymore. Security was so tight, it was as if Nexus and this island were about to be attacked. But this was not the case at all. So let me explain. I'll keep it short.
You know all about witches, I'm sure. People say they're horrible, mean, vicious, duplicitous, and communist. Of course, this is not the case. But that's what people think. I bet that you even go around trick-or-treating on October 30th and meet up with some fascinating witches. I bet you like witches more than you think. Well, I bet you wouldn't be able to like the witches on the dark island of Nexus.
This is because the king, the so-called benevolent ruler of the island, decided that witches had become too dangerous and spread diseases.
He was also somewhat afraid of them because they did not support his scientific experiments. They wanted nothing to do with him.
So he ordered his bionic troops to seek and destroy them. Of course, once this happened, the witches, keen and savvy as they were, had been prepared and fled all over the world.
Some even landed in your neighborhood. Most of them were happy to leave the dark island and yelled, "Good riddance! Hope you had fun with all your pathetic machines." They vowed never to return to the dark island. Unfortunately, This was when Anya and Zach lost touch with their parents and were seeking them on the Island of Light.
But King Nexus just laughed. He knew his people on the island of Nexus agreed that the witches had to go, for they were suspicious creatures, and they had their own languages, their own bodies, and their own thoughts. In short, they were dangerous, and had never complied with Nexus's self-made laws.
If the witches had stayed on the island, they might have challenged Nexus's laws and actions.
You see, towards the end of all the global wars, Nexus had found a miraculous way to inject newborn babies with a powerful gene that transformed them into bionic humans. That is, once born, all the babies were half human and half robot with amazing powers. At the same time, Nexus had spread false news about an epidemic and had everyone, but everyone, injected with a medicine that fed false information into their brains and electrically controlled all their homes, if not their thinking.
This medicine did not cure anything. It was the great, devious invention of brilliant King Nexus and his scientists.
Yes, as I've said, he was brilliant, but brilliance has nothing to do with humanity. Nexus, more or less, controlled everyone's mind.
Moreover, his medicine led all the people on the Dark Island to feel they were above all the people in the world. That is, what was left of it. For most of the countries and islands on the earth had emptied due to extreme heat and campaigns of misinformation spread by Nexus's mass media.
What a fantastic people you are, declared King Nexus. Nobody, but nobody will ever be able to defeat us. My hat goes off to you. He spoke to a gathering of leading scientists. I mean, my crown goes off to you. My crown belongs to me. And since he and only he knew the formula for creating bionic people through his medicine, he imprisoned the scientists in a desolate dungeon on the highest mountain of Nexus. They were useful, but only when he contained them. Then, as soon as the scientists were incarcerated, he ordered his bionic generals to declare war against all the countries of the world.
His armies and marines were strong and invincible, and within 5 years they had wiped the earth clean of all other races. His people were pure Aryans, super bionic Aryans. However, many of his bionic people were uneasy. They weren't certain whether their human side could be trusted to maintain their robotic side. And the human side was fearful that the humanity might be completely demolished by the robotic side one day.
Of course, King Nexus had no problem trusting either side. The scientists were under his control, that is.
All except for a small group of rebellious scientists and witches.
Moreover, there was a glitch in the work of Nexus's followers.
For they had not been able to control the witches who had fled to the Island of Light.
But when King Nexus discovered his treachery, he had the Island of Light transformed into a playland with a mansion just for Nexus, where he and the chosen citizens of Nexus could spend their vacation and run wild.
Consequently, they destroyed this island, which was the only island on the planet besides Nexus that offered roller coaster rides, bumper cars, cotton candy that drew the Nexians there. They could eat and drink and trample all over the fields and forests. Yet despite the pure pleasures of the island, within 2 years, it was wasted.
That is, despite magnificent hotels, restaurants, swimming pools, boating and hunting, the entire island had become a junkyard for the citizens of Nexus. Most of the forest had been ravaged, garbage, dumpsters replaced restaurants, and all the animals were either killed or had found hiding places.
There was no help for them. Many of them were caged just so the people could gaze at them.
Let me remind you, Nexus was born a genius, and his parents had treated him as a genius from the time he popped out of his mother's womb.
Some people suspected that he might have witch genes.
But ever since he was tested and his genes were clean, he was able to look into a mirror and convince himself that he was a pure Nexian, the purest of pure. He sensed and then clearly knew he was above anyone in the universe, and indeed, he recognized the world around him to seemingly please his people, like he was pleasing himself.
Thanks to his technological skills, his people never had to do anything for themselves. At one time, they had human servants and all kinds of workers, but now, thanks to King Nexus, they had no need for them. The robots did everything. They provided all the food a family needed. They carried people to their destinations. They cleaned and developed sprays to purify the air. They invented unique machines to build schools, offices, stadiums, toys, and mechanical stations where the bionics were repaired and cleaned. There was no need for doctors. Hospitals were old-fashioned. The robots could cure anything or anyone.
You would think that the Nexians would become fat and lazy from doing nothing, but the opposite is true. Since they did not have to lift a finger at home, the Nexians had tons of time to play or watch some sport, from rugby to basketball, from tennis to golf, from tennis to pickleball, from golf to swimming. Each one of their homes was fitted with a workout room and swimming pool. Nexians were in great shape and enrolled in the armed forces, where they learned various ways of protecting their properties and killing their enemies.
With the exception of the witches, Nexians could do nothing but sing the praises of their king. All this happened ages ago, and somehow there were still some humans and witches who had survived in abandoned, leftover islands.
But I have lost the thread of my tale, and it is time to return to the lovely Anya and her brother,
Wonderful. I can't believe that I read this. Really, you've done a splendid job. And we'll come back to this. I'd like to begin with just mentioning a few things about this novella, and then move on to The Grammar of Fantasy by Johnny Rodari, and then the third book, L. Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz. I want to make some comments about these books. But what I just want to sum up what it is or why I wrote this. I began writing it for my grandchildren who are 3 and 5 years old, thinking, and of course the names of the 2 twins in the story are names of my grandchildren. And but I wanted to write a children's book that is for younger children, not a book for the young adults. But as I began writing, I realized that I wanted to reach an audience that was older and that would understand a lot of the symbols, a lot of the characters in the story, and I got carried away. And I kept writing for about 90 pages or so, and I won't tell you what happens with the twins and the Wenigans, and also what happens. Something that you could read if you really want to. But what has really pleased me is that this novella was published by a New York publisher, and they've decided to do 2 more novellas. In other words, it's going to be a trilogy, and whatever happens to Nexus and all the complications and fights and so on, which are somewhat reminiscent of our own days, but I think it has a sense of humor that I wanted to also convey in writing this book. So that's sort of the background, and we maybe can talk a little about it when I finish talking about the other 2 books. But to do before I move to the next book, and that's the grammar fantasy.
Hey.
And this is for Leaf, and this is for Maria.
Woohoo!
And this book is really a book that changed my life. It's a translation of a book written by Johnny Rodari. It's a G-I-N-N-I, Rodari, R-O-D-A-R-I, he's dead, and he was in the 20th century probably the greatest writer in Italy for children. And he also wrote theoretical books, which is the grammar of fantasy. And it's also a book that has informed my two cohorts over here, because the storytelling program that I developed with the Children's Theater Company of Minnesota, was based on this book. In other words, ideas that Johnny Rodari, he influenced me, and I studied with him. Because of him, I learned Italian. I went and lived in Rome for many years, and also translated other stories. He also wrote many stories. And anybody in Italy, if you go into any bookstore in Italy, they still have Johnny Rodari's books. I mean, he has not been forgotten. There's nobody like him whatsoever. And in this particular book, really contains a lot of suggestions on how to work with children, how to enable children to become storytelling in their own lives, and not to suppress or oppress children. And it's an amazing book, beautifully written, with some of the stories in this book. And it came out actually in the 1990s. It was my first translation. And this is a retranslation with illustrations. My only, I'm actually somewhat angry at the publishing house because Rodari was a communist. True communist, not a communist. And he would have been horrified to see that the book is done it's expensive. This is not inexpensive. He wanted his words to reach everyone. And of course, you can, if you can read Italian, you can go there and you can get inexpensive copies of the book, but you can't do that in America. And I fought with the publisher and lost, but at least it's out there. And I think that if this book is bought by schools and used by educators, they really, I think, develop a type of pedagogy that we really need in the United States. I mean, the notion enabling children to become storytellers of their own lives, that motto has really stuck, and I think it's stuck with Maria and also with me. And the third book that I'm not going to give to anyone.
I was ready.
The third book, I'm a great admirer of L. Frank Baum, and I did publish about 10 or 15 years ago a collection of the Emerald City of Oz and the Glinda of Oz, not just the Wizard of Oz. And nobody knows that, and this is the book is stunning.
It is beautifully beautiful.
I only received it about 2 or 3 months ago. The publisher is with didn't even consider Penguin Classics, one of the best publishers around. They didn't even consult with me in terms of the design. Fortunately, they didn't, because it turned out to be a beautiful book. But what is significant about this book is nobody knows that L. Frank Baum wrote 16 novels from about 1899 until his death in the 1920s. And this is very indicative of his politics, that in all of the latter novels that Dorothy is in, she refuses to go back to Oklahoma. She doesn't want to go back to America, and she stays in Oz for the rest of her life. That's where, and these stories are very political. He married a woman who was the daughter of one of the leading feminists in America in the late 19th century, and the daughter and mother-in-law had a huge influence on him. He had to become a feminist because of them, and so it's a fantastic book, and I would buy it just for the design. And so, but I wanted to state that within all of it, within this great design are these 2 or 3 novels that you probably never read about it or never knew about, and it's exciting, to read the stories. So that's about all that I want to say tonight. That is, I would like to hear from you if you have any questions about my work and about why I do all these things. My wife thinks I'm a little sugar. That's if you're Jewish, you know what that means. And I am a sugar, and that's why I write so much and keeps me going. So thank you for coming. It's really nice of you to come out in weather like this. And it's really good to be here. So, yes, Larry,
say again, what's the difference between the 1990 version of Grammar Fantasy and
it's just really redoing the book so that there were some mistakes, minor mistakes, and so on. So there's no real great difference. What is different is that there are beautiful illustrations. I mean, I must say that the publisher, it's a woman, that she really tried to make this book into a beautiful book, and she did. I mean, if you look at the book on the table outside, you can see that the illustrations are really fine. So maybe I should keep my mouth shut.
No, you're supposed to say how much better you got at translating. So the power.
I always pay a lot of money for Maria.
And the new edition will change your life.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
Could you talk about your soccer career a little
My
bit?
what?
Your soccer career.
My soccer career.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I played. My father was from the old country, and he was a great soccer player in New York City. I'm a New Yorker, you can probably hear it in my accent. He grew up in Hell's Kitchen, and was one of the best. Though being Jewish, he played for Saint Agatha's College or something like that, and he was one professionally became one of the best goaltenders of the time in the 1930s, 40s, and so I always I never really wanted to play soccer. I was mainly interested in baseball and basketball. to a school where I definitely could not play against these gigantic football players and baseball players, and I switched to soccer. And I played for this high school, and then went to Dartmouth College, and I played for Dartmouth College for 4 years, and actually during that time, the major event in my life, and I then became a professional player for a while. In my junior year at Dartmouth, I flunked geology. And my father, and I was also having a romance with a young woman, and my parents wanted to break it up. So my father said, I'm going to pay for you to go to London, to go to the University of London, which was free for outsiders. And you can spend the summer there making up for failure, right? And he also gave me a letter from the president of the Soccer Association in New York City to go to look up Arsenal to see what I could work out while I was there. So believe it or not, this is one of the greatest soccer teams of all times. I took this letter to the head secretary of the Association for Soccer in London, and he said, "A Yank plays soccer?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm not too bad." and he said, he grabbed hold of me, and he had a Mercedes or some very snazzy car, and drove me to a store, bought me shoes and a whole outfit. It takes me to, this was, in July, so they're not in their regular season. It takes me to where they're getting ready for the coming season. And he introduces me to the players there. And from that point on, I learned so much that summer that when I came back to Dartmouth, I made all Ivy League team, and then I went on to play semi-professional. When I went to grad school for 5 years, I played on a pretty good team, mainly Europeans, and that was my great career.
But how do you know that?
Pardon?
I'm asking this gentleman how he knows about your soccer.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, I'm part of the boys book club with Marty, and we had the privilege of
Oh, right.
Zipes come to our book club.
Okay.
When we read Bambi.
Yeah, must have
A couple months ago, yeah.
Yeah.
I also was wondering if you ever had met or worked with Joseph Campbell.
No, I don't think so. Yes.
I was interested in Rodari's parents. You said they were communist parents,
Yes.
and I was wondering what that actually would be like. What would that be? How would you know?
At the end of the war, the Communist Party was the largest party in 1945 in Italy. And so that joining the Communist Party, unlike America, didn't matter. They had many different socialist parties and
Yeah.
conservative parties, but the largest party was for a while the Communist Party, and he was not. He was drawn to the Communist Party because of its politics, but he was not really let me say, a politically driven author. What he basically really wanted to do, he became a journalist. He was a teacher in high schools in the 1930s. He escaped it, he didn't have to fight for the Mussolini. In fact, he was in a group that fought against Mussolini. And after that, he became a journalist and then from a journalist, he began writing these stories, and they were so amazing to people that he stopped becoming a journalist and began writing these books for children, and then going into schools and working with educators. He was just really a remarkable writer and thinker and devoted to children. Yeah, Carol.
Well, you might also mention that he ran a radio show, which were stories with 3 endings,
Right,
that was broadcast nationally.
right, yes,
And he did a lot with media,
right,
so he had really a national presence.
yes, yes. Yes,
Would you expand on why, what's, his ideas about children telling their own stories, like why it was
Yeah.
so life-changing for you? I'd like to
well,
hear more
it was
about.
life-changing because his imagination is so tantalizing. Everything he writes in the grammar fantasy just really stimulated my thinking in different ways, not in the traditional, let us say, stiff way, but he just opened up my mind, and I was just amazed by, and it's not just this one book. I've read about 15 or 20 of his books and translated some of the others, but this is his major, let us say, gift to us. And he was a very modest person. He was not, and he fought against the Communist Party. When the Communist Party began to change in the 1960s, and where it was quite clear that the Communist Party was no longer communist, but was more of a dictatorship or authoritarian country. He dropped out of the Communist Party. But up until that time, he could not get his book, because the Catholic Church controlled all the schools. Okay, really controlled, and in a terrible way. And that lasted until the 1970s. And so he had to fight against the Catholic Church in his writing. His books were banned, and also they were not published, but they were published by the Communist Party. His early works, and it wasn't until about the time he died in the 1980s that regular publishers began to publish his books. And so he was really, despite that, I mean, he was extremely well known. Again, the Communist Party was large and could really disseminate the books.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, some things that, for me, that I find profound about this book is that so much of material that is provided for kids feels like it's about them consuming it. Consume this narrative, consume all the narratives, and then buy the lunchbox and the backpack and the t-shirt. And so it feels like so much of story is about capitalism. And this is not that at all. This is, in fact, the opposite. It is saying that this man values children so much that he's saying that they are the producers, not merely the consumers. And that really struck me. And the other thing that I really love about this book is that the playfulness of language, and I think so much of play is taken out of literacy education, and like all those games about let's play with prefix, pseudo ballerina, or whatever. But like, let's make language production fun. And then he literally says in here, not that so that every child becomes a writer, but so that they aren't enslaved by language. And those are things that really hit me about it. Leaf wanna build up.
Yeah, I'll build one more. And a lot of, like Jack said, in neighborhood bridges, which was going into classrooms of fifth graders, sixth graders, we used a lot of these techniques, and you would see these students like who struggled with writing or struggled with telling stories or even reading, like they would get up there and tell just brilliant stories, and the confidence it gave them, and
Yeah,
just like
joy.
unlocked
Yeah.
something in them that was really beautiful.
We gotta update your bio though.
Thank you. You need to,
I'm gonna email you.
no, Jack, you need to explain.
Well, we don't know.
That
if
Maria took over the program from you, and that Leaf and Maria are heading a new program.
Yeah, I will say the relationship with Children's Theater became very complicated, and I hope that all of you are able to see the film that got Best of the Fest called Magic and Monsters, which talks about the very difficult history. Of course, I was there in the 80s, and when the lawsuits came forward, I took a very active role in saying that the teachers failed the children then, and we teachers will not fail them now.
Thank you.
And so our entire department left. Everybody that was part of our program left the theater. And because the average age of someone coming forward to report sexual abuse is 52. So when that statute of limitations was lifted, and that all those lines about that, but it was so long ago, seems to me like they were right in the pocket, and they were all my friends, and they deserve to be listened to, and I think I think that there's lots of ways to lead, and I'm not really impressed with the suppress the story way of leading.
Yes.
I would much rather open it up and let healing begin. So we don't know. We had a lot of fun with neighborhood bridges, but when our entire department left, we created a new program which has really expanded so much further. Because Jack keeps writing stuff, and he keeps sending us more stories. So we have a new program called the Speaking Out Collective, which is flourishing.
Great, wonderful. No,
And it was named after one.
And imagine that. One of his books is called.
Speaking.
Could you imagine that he would advocate for speaking out?
and of course, we were kicked out of some schools. Initially, when the program started, we had a lot of difficulty convincing teachers that we have something here that would make teaching exciting and interesting and so on. And it took a long time. These two have driven me crazy. Rufus is so talented and provocative.
I think you already agree.
They're both provocative, that's for sure. Any other questions?
I have one minor question, Pat, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Since I know you did this for years, you went to Rome, what did you actually do in Rome during those years? Your trip to
Drank
Rome.
wine.
To Rome, what did you do in Rome?
In
Give us a little bit of history of why you
Well,
were
in
there.
Rome, my major goal was to learn the language, and so that it could really do honor, to do justice to Ugary's words and some other writers I translated. I fell in love with the Romans. They're just wonderful people, amazing. Both Carol and I really enjoyed about 6 or 7 years where I would take time off from the university and take one semester and go during the summer to Rome. So it really, and then I met the Rodari family, except for the Rodari was dead, but I met the widow, his widow and daughter, and became friendly with them and tried to, actually I was the first American discovered with Doherty to translate it. And now some of the other books have been translated.
So I wanted to ask, follow up on that question before about the parents, his parents. When I was 8, I lived in a farm up by Bemidji, and my parents were leaders in the Farmers Union. So we went to Alaska, and there was this whole drama because they had trouble, it was the 50s, and they had trouble getting jobs, and they were thinking, oh no, you know, they're following us. And there was this horrible thing. There was somebody's parents got killed, were killed because of their political beliefs at that time. I can't remember their name. But they were very well known, and you know who it was? Oh. So one day I lost my junior Farmers Union card, and this was before your grandkids, you know, got rid of the mean stuff. So I was really scared. I thought, oh no, I have blown this whole thing. My parents are gonna, who knows what's gonna happen? And so I told my mother, and she said, well, no, it's, you know, it's not gonna, it's okay, and maybe we'll find it. I don't know if we ever found it, but, you know, that was why I wondered. I think they were both really important to my becoming a storyteller. They were just, you know, because they believed what they believed, and they did what they thought.
You know, I'm wondering, is there any connection between Rodari's work, what he was doing, and Maria Montessori? I mean, did they connect at all?
Not that I know of. And to be honest, I think the Montessori method is conservative and not
Well, maybe compared to Rodari, but not
yes,
compared
right,
to.
right, exactly. So I think that Rodari really distrusted everything that had to do with Catholicism. Yeah.
Question, how did you get interested in the Grimm brothers, fairy tales and connection with German?
How did I? Let's see. My field is actually not German. I got a PhD from Columbia in English and American literature, and then, but I went to Germany. I burned out when I was at Columbia, and I fled to Germany because a friend of mine kept saying, if you really want to find out why you're Jewish, you should come to Germany, which sort of dazzled me. How could somebody say something like that? But it was really annoying. He was a good friend. And I burned out at Columbia, so I said I would take a year off. And when I went to Germany, I learned that there is a lot of ignorance about what happened in Germany and what was going on in Germany. And I met a lot of interesting people who really changed my life. And then I was introduced to the Frankfurt School, which is a sort of neo-Marxist collection of great philosophers who were German Jewish, who came over here, who escaped the Nazis, came over here, and then eventually went back. And they had a profound influence on me. And then I became so fluent in German that when I wanted to go back to New York after teaching in Germany for a while, I got a really great offer to go to the German department at NYU, and then had a 5-year career there. But when I protested against it, I led a strike at NYU during the Vietnam War period, and I was blacklisted and couldn't get a job for a while. But came to the Midwest and was saved first by Milwaukee and now by Minneapolis.
We did a book club with Jack. Remember that first one was a doozy. One-dimensional man.
Yes,
Woo.
Marcuse, Herbert Marcuse.
Some big sentences in that one.
Jack picked like the most difficult books they could read.
Yeah,
They were this thick.
yeah. That was fun though.
Yes.
Jack, did you know George Stoney
No, I don't think so.
at NYU?
No.
I don't know exactly, he was there for a long time, he was the, film, professor.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, I think we're done.
All right. Well, thank you
All
very
right,
much.
thank
you for
We
coming.
will- Perfect.